If you were to write your own storyteller mastery book, referencing Gary Gygax's book, Master of the Game, in your own words, how would you define these terms, ideas? Moving force, creator, designer, arbiter, overseer, director, umpire, referee, or judge?
Shite. I don't normally like to reference notes when I make these videos, but I'm going to have to here, aren't I? I do have a part-finished GM guidebook, but lately I've been thinking maybe a player's guidebook that's actually about playing the game rather than the rules of the game might be an interesting thing to do, but the terminology might confuse people. But yeah, anyway, I'm hedging because that's a lot. Let me think. So, a moving force in a game, I mean, it's usually you as the games master to an extent because you're willing to run the game, you have an adventure idea, and to one extent or another you generally have to try and drive the action forward. You know, prompting people, what do you want to do? Having things going on in the background or having things turn up and interrupt what the players are doing, you know, setting the challenges and so on. But the important part there about moving force is that you're providing the impetus to move things forward. So the inciting incident or the threat, things like that. That's what I would see as being a moving force. As a creator, I think a creator implies more the narrative side of things. You create the story, you create the world sometimes if you run in your own setting. It's also part of your role as a game designer is to create that side of the game. So that's where I'd see a creator role as. Whenever you're making something new, whether you're inserting it into an existing intellectual property and setting, or coming up with your new one, or creating your own game entirely, I think that's where the role of creator comes in, but more on the narrative side. Game design, a designer, that's more about the mechanics. So to some extent that can be coming up with rules or rulings on the fly when a player tries to do something stupid. So that's one side of it, and it's the other half of game creation, alongside creator, is the design aspect. But I would say it tends to be more mechanical. But then role-playing games, and to an extent some computer games, are a bit weird in that the design side and the creative side commingles, and ideally the design side, the rules and so on, should complement and reinforce the more narrative creator side. So yeah, those tend to go together a bit more than they might in other disciplines. Arbiter. An arbiter is someone who settles arguments, right? So I don't think that role comes up that often in tabletop games. Where you're likely to get arbitration is where the players are in conflict with each other, and that doesn't tend to happen that often in RPGs. Not to say it doesn't happen, but it doesn't come up that often. And then, you know, you have to be fair, and you have to be seen to be fair to the players between each other. The only other time it might come up is if you're arbitrating between your own choices and what the players have to put up with and do. You know, killer DMs fail at being arbiters because they're playing to win, not to produce a... Fair's a strong word with other implications these days, but you know, the rules implemented as is and fairly, and you know, if you'd done things differently you could have got out of this situation. I guess the last place in which you're an arbiter is between the rules and the players. Sometimes the rules are poorly written, hard to understand, unfair, things like that. And that's where you can step in and be an arbiter between the voice of the creator of the game and the players of the game. They're technically a games master is also a player. Overseer, that kind of implies that you're in charge, you're the manager, rather than a facilitator. I tend to see a games master's role as being one of facilitation, and I also tend to think that's the role of the designer as well as the games master, is to facilitate and create opportunities for adventure, heroics, fun, teamwork, all of these kind of things. So overseer isn't language I would ever use, I don't think, unless it's part of the setting, like when you're playing Fallout. Director, equally, I think, like storyteller, I think director is a misnomer as well. At the height of White Wolf's success and fame, storyteller was almost as popular a term for the games master as games master or dungeon master. But I think words matter. They have semantic content to them. So describing yourself as a storyteller tended to lead people to have a very set idea of what kind of story they wanted to create, and so to hem in the players and prevent them perhaps from playing as they wanted to play, railroading them into a particular story and particular ideas. And I think similarly, when we talk about director, we probably think of film director, and that has similar implications, that you will do what I tell you to do, you will play in the way that I tell you to play, and so as a semantic choice, I would move away from that. You can interpret that in a more forgiving way. It's the director's vision that you see in a film, and they're making choices to try and create a certain aesthetic and so on. And so you can take a softer view, but I would still avoid that language. And then lastly, we have umpire, referee, or judge, which shouldn't all be lumped together, I don't think. But an umpire or a referee is basically the same as an arbiter. Apply and interpret the rules and deal with conflicts and problems in the spirit or letter of the rules is where that comes in. Judge has different implications. You stand before a judge and you are assessed and then punished. Or a judge looks at something you've done or made. Like we had a village fete here recently. Who had the biggest onion? And how are we measuring biggest? Full length, weight, circumference. How are we judging which is the biggest onion? Yes, this is important stuff. And you don't. Most games that doesn't really come into it. And again, it's a bit iffy because it comes down to subjective personal judgments a lot of the time. So, who deserves the best role player XP? Offload it on the players and have them vote, I guess. But, I think I would avoid judge as well. An umpire and referee, they've been popular sometimes as terms, but to me that's not really what the role of a games master is. Not really. Not often.